Good. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here today, and thank you to our guests, and welcome to the conference Inequality and Education, the key for true development. So, in the next few minutes, with our esteemed guests, we will embark on a thought provoking debate concerning the profound link between a nation's economic and social well being and the quality of education it provides to its citizens. So, as you might know, data of inequality is a quite sensitive topic, as well as very much unexplored and disregarded. So, unfortunately, in today's world, where education is often considered to be among the greatest equalizers, we are witness to major differences concerning the levels of education provided. So today, throughout our conference, we will try to unreveal the intricate tapestry of factors that influence the levels of education, and we will try to explain what we mean when we talk about quality in education. So, education, and we start from this basic fact that education we believe is not just a privilege and should not be a privilege. It's a fundamental right and a gateway to personal growth and to social inclusion, and also a catalyst for development, not only of individuals, of course, but of entire nations. So, just to provide you some more information about that and a little bit of background, inequality in education manifests itself in a series of disparities concerning the educational outcomes. And I'm referring to the fact that, for instance, students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds tend to have limited and lower graduation rates and also limited access to higher education and of course fewer opportunities for skill development. And of course, this has repercussions on individuals' life, different aspects of individuals' life, and their adulthood. But we will start from some basic questions, such as what does quality education truly entail, and what are the factors that contribute positively to its attainment, and on the other side, what are the obstacles that hinder its progress. So these are all questions that deeply resonates with us, and we will try to provide answers to them. It will be important at the end of the conference, having in mind that, yeah, it's important to comprehend the nexus between education and socioeconomic well-being. But also, it is important to understand that we are not only talking about individual empowerment, but about the economic prosperity of nations, and of course, the promise of a brighter future for everyone. So I think we can start. So we really would like to create an open and dynamic debate. So at the end, there will be also parts reserved for the Q&A. So feel free to ask and express your thoughts, comments, and whatsoever. And let's together find answers that can lead us toward a world where quality education is not just an aspiration, but a reality for us all. So I'll leave the floor to my colleague to present our esteemed guests.
Yeah, I would like to present Mike Fisher, that is Education Director at Stellarize, graduated from University College London Institute of Education with a master degree in Education and International Development. Through his career, Mike has lived out his passion for leading learners and teachers. He has been an educator, a writer, a researcher, and a manager of educator across Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. A running theme of his work has been the pursuit of providing quality education to marginalized communities, and this allowed him to find a natural fit in Stila Rise when he joined it as an education manager in 2021, in July 2021. And here with me, I have also the honor of having the Professor Valentina Zanasi, English teacher for 14 years and a regional referent of Stila Rise.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, I would like.
We're saying hi.
Yeah, I know. Um, I would like to start with a question directly to Fisher. What is the social impact of education, and how a good quality education impacts on a person's life, on their personal situation, and more broadly, what is the impact brought on the whole society?
Thank you. Firstly, to say hello to everybody. Thank you for the glowing introduction. I'm very excited to be speaking with you all, and it should be with. Please do contribute throughout. We definitely don't want a long monologue coming from one person, especially on a big screen overlooking everybody. That looks terrifying. But thank you so much for inviting me to talk today with you guys. The first question is a big one, of what impact does it have on society, and I'm going to answer it very, very broadly. I mean, it has every impact. I don't know how many of you attending online and attending in the room right now have ever been to a different setting outside of Italy, perhaps where it's been a developing country for a while, or poverty has been part of the landscape for generations. But many of the differences that you would notice, many of the mechanisms, much of the infrastructure, there are of course so many reasons behind the differences, but one of them, of course, is education, and the way that you connect and the way that you collaborate with people who have had a different kind of education to you. It takes about 5 minutes to realize wow, an education system, the quality of education, the contact you have with other cultures and other types of people, whether it is inward looking and outward looking, whether it is concept driven or content driven, all of these things are having a huge effect on who I'm now talking to in front of me. And you start to spot certain patterns. And I think when you've done that a few times and lived and worked with people from these different communities, you can read the statistics online, you can read the theoretical papers, but I mean the evidence that you need is in front of you. And it's also a sobering reflection on how much of a product of your own education you are yourself. We all like to think that we have, become who we are independently, but the reality is so much of who we are, of how we think and what we do, is impacted by the education, quote unquote, that we have received. Now, of course, education can go beyond just school. It is also the education you receive from family, if you have family, when you're between 0 and 5. It is what you're doing after school. It is what happens in further institutions. It is what happens when you join extracurricular clubs. It is what is happening right now as we converse with each other. But we, to such an extent, are affected by this. So if you want to seek any societal change, have any impact long term across a group of human beings, you always have to start with education. It is the answer to almost every question.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And following this first answer, we can understand that the actual impact on one's life and the positive externalities generated from the whole society. However, we would like to address the impact that education can have on a specific issue, the persistence of worldwide inequality that manifests itself both on a global scale, on a local level. It also manifests itself in economic terms, such as income inequality, access to basic goods, and social terms, access, for example, access to basic services, difference in treatment, and so on. So a question that we would like to ask both of you here today is, can education tackle existing inequality, and by equally ensuring access to quality education, can existing inequalities be solved or mitigated? Fisher, you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm sorry. I didn't. Yes, definitely. You can't. There is no magic solution with all of these questions like this. There's never one answer. Anyone who claims to give you a singular answer that is the only truth is lying. And education single-handedly won't do it, but it is the best long-term response. Can it mitigate? Yes, it can mitigate. And give you an example, just that's on the top of my head because it's very recent. 20 minutes ago, I was in a meeting with our team in the DRC, so we work in the Congo, and we were having a conversation about the teacher's role at lunchtime with the students, and you could see the impact of an education system which they have of them, in fact, in this case, all of the teachers present have grown up with, which essentially says you have your very, very defined duties in life. You have very defined duties in terms of your gender. You have very defined duties in terms of your age. You have very defined duties if you're a teacher or a cleaner. You do not mix and match the roles and duties. So many of the teachers are saying, well, we don't want to be doing things during lunchtime, which would not be typical of a teacher, right? We would not want to be handing food out. We would not want to be cleaning the kitchen, etc. And that's, it's not to say that is wrong or right, but it is definitely a response which is the product of a certain way of educating and a certain way of bringing up a society. And then you have other engagers in the course, such as myself, who have had a different kind of education system where there is more blurred lines between people's responsibilities. It is not quite so set. And so can you mitigate that? Can you bring change? Yes, but only by communication. It would have been easier. How do I resolve this issue of we need a certain way of functioning at lunchtime? The answer right now, of course, on a practical level, is to have that conversation, to open up from people from different backgrounds, to recognize differences, to recognize patterns, to show empathy with each other, and to come to a compromise or to come to a solution together. But there's no doubt that if you want to function on a larger scale more smoothly, the education system is where you would start, because the way of seeing things in the first place would change. You would fundamentally change someone's viewpoint about something much larger. And it's a lot easier to do so when you're talking about your formative years. I don't know if, that's a very specific, localized point. Of course, your question may be referring to larger, more global themes and global inequalities. But the point is that you can mitigate anything with education, but there's no doubt that the earlier you start, and the science shows with brain development, the earlier you start to do so in someone's life, the greater the impact. And the reason, of course, that human societies and civilizations have not already solved our problems and invested in education in that way is because, from a political perspective, it is not something where you reap the rewards instantly, right? If the solution is better quality childhood education, the problem is that the impacts will only come in 20 years' time, in the next generation. And by then, you as a president, you as a prime minister have long gone from power, and others will be taking reaping the rewards that you started. The tree that grows, that's the seed that you planted many years ago. And I believe that's one of the reasons that investment in education continues to be, across pretty much every country in the world, an area where it's underinvested, because of the long-term slow burn impact, which solves most of your problems, but does so a generation too late if you're seeking instant power and instant results.
Much. So my question is addressed to you, Professor. So as a regional coordinator, so my question is, what is the impact of education on the Italian society, and how can we assess it? And also, have you seen any differences concerning also the access to education here in Italy as well?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. I'm just a humble English middle school teacher from Modena. I've been a teacher for 14 years now. And Nicola Govoni and Still Arise, which is the organization I volunteer for, kind of changed my life. So I'm more than thrilled and honored to be here today and do my little part to tell a little bit of the story and to answer your question. So I really hope I'll be worthy of the task I've been set. I wrote down a few notes because, I could get nervous. So this is a huge question, again, and it would require a very, very long answer, but I think education is the very foundation of every society, like Mike said. And in our country, we can see that educating is turning into an emergency. Like there's an educational emergency, really. And I could start by telling you about how families have the most crucial, critical impact on their kids. And the fact that the worst situations I've dealt with were born inside their native homes. And we could also talk about what we hear on the news, in terms of teenagers, disrespectful behaviors, bullying, violence, aggressions, even in schools. It would be very easy to point the finger at social media or new technologies or the pandemics, the alienation in our society, and so on. But from my experience, what we should really focus on when we talk about education is a more basic, original, and fundamental idea. We should ask ourselves how we adults, parents, and educators treat kids, how we see them, and if we see them for everything they are, considering every aspect of their identity. We should take some steps back and concentrate on the very core of human nature, that is, a desire for beauty, justice, happiness, and truth. Every one of us was born with this bundle of needs and deep desires. And unless we as adults deal with this self evident truth within us and within our kids, we will never be able to provide real education, in my opinion. As a matter of fact, from my experience, education is not just a bunch of information or notions like knowledge that I'm supposed to give my students as a teacher. It's first and foremost a relationship. It's building trust, respect, and acceptance between me, the adult, and each and every kid I have in front of me. Education is about treating that kid as the unique, amazing, and infinite individual that he or she is. At the very heart of every inequality, we've been talking about inequalities. In my opinion, there is the lack of understanding of who that human being really is. At our very core, that kid is me, and I'm him or her. Like we are the same. Our needs are the same. Our aspirations are the same. Our desperate desire to be loved and loved is the same, is actually the same. So understanding this and working on this makes the whole difference to me. So I could be the best teacher with the best syllabus, the most interesting topics in my lessons, but if I forget about my humanity and my students' humanity, nothing matters in education. So we got to listen to them, to what they have to say, to their dreams and passions, even though they might be different from our passions or from what we think. A lot of times I see that especially parents put a lot of pressure on kids, hoping they will achieve everything they wanted for themselves or couldn't have as young people. These kids are not allowed to make mistakes anymore, to learn from them, to be loved but not controlled, or sometimes, on the contrary, to be taken care of, to feel they're actually worthy of love and attention. So recently in my school, we had students from a third year class, so 13 for 12 years old, organize a full scientific convention by themselves, all by themselves, where they had to speak, even in English, about life after the pandemics and its psychological impact on teenagers. So it was a huge topic. They had to welcome the audience, prepare the coffee break, everything. So some of the shyest kids actually decided to speak in front of all their friends and all of their families and clearly state things like, Mom, Dad, we are not you. Listen to what we have to say. You ask us to understand when you're tired, but do you ever ask us how our day was or if we are tired? So all these things, I mean, huge things if you think about it for a 13, 12-year-old kid, no? So they really stepped up for themselves and showed us their inner richness. So this was just an example, to say what real education can can bring out from our students. So going back to the other part of your question, I think in Italy, well, yeah, inequalities, of course, but in Italy, first of all, we should start by assessing our teachers, not only basing our judgment on their CVs or resumes, but on their emotional intelligence and human skills. And speaking of differences in accessing education in my country, I've definitely seen them. I work for a private school. So, which means that only kids from wealthy families or kids with a scholarship can access my school. And I think inequalities start here, but not because of the existence of private schools, because in all, they actually offer a public service. And if you think of it, the parents sending kids to private schools pay double because they pay for the taxes, who pay for the public schools, and they pay for their kids' education. But this is not the point. I think the problem is a public school system where, as I said, teachers are hired with no previous personal or professional background check. Like head teachers and principals usually have their hands tied, and they have to accept any teacher who is at the top of the waiting list, let's say, and that first accepts the job. So what I was saying even a few moments ago about CVs and resumes doesn't even happen in public schools in Italy. So, and I've seen a lot of kids moving from public schools to my school or other private schools to find, let's say, a more welcoming environment, because oftentimes in public schools, there are peculiar characteristic or there are difficulties like kids with dyslexia or other learning disorders or disabilities were not fully taken into account. The schools couldn't provide enough assistance for them, but I'm not blaming this on public schools or public school teachers. I'm saying that our government, as Mike said, should focus more on the importance of education in school and provide more resources. And I think of a real change in the educational model, which is something that also Still Arise is trying to do. And I'm gonna finish here. To be fully honest, I don't think it's just a matter of money or resources. I think there should be a big change in mentality, especially in the people deciding to become teachers and not fully understanding the immense importance of what we are doing. Like sometimes, people choose to become teacher because of the long vacations and, you work just half time, sure, part time, sure. No, it's I think it's not just a job. It's a call. It's a mission, and teachers can truly make a difference in a student's life in a good or in a bad way. So I think the change should start from there. I hope I've answered your question. Maybe more.
Of course, you have, and thank you so much for your words. You should reflect upon them. So now we'll focus more on Silara's experience. So leave the floor to you.
Yeah. I will return to Fisher, to Mr. Fisher. We said that Still Arise pursued the impressive mission of ensuring access to education where it's most needed, where local communities lack access to education. Could you briefly describe and present us with the activity of Still Arise, and more specifically, we would like to know what are the strategies that your organization implements to ensure access to education, and also to make it more attractive, especially in contexts where child labor, for example, is still present.
Thank you. A couple of quick points of order. Firstly, you can call me Mike. No one calls me Mr. Fisher these days, just Mike. I also want to pick up on how Valentina introduced herself, because she described herself obviously self-deprecatingly, but and with a smile. But she said just a humble teacher, and that's part of the issue, is that in certain societies, and I believe from what I have understood, I'm not Italian myself, but from what I can understand of the Italian education system and how it's seen, with too many people, it is seen as as if it's a humble role. I can tell you, hiring a teacher, finding a teacher, training a teacher is very, very difficult. It is such a complicated job. You are essentially looking for someone who is of as much technical experience and capacity as any other role, whether they were working in IT or finance or law or anything else. But on top of that, you would also trust to parent your child. So when you hire someone in most other areas, you're not looking for all those other skills, which would mean that you would place a human being in their care and say, I want my child to grow up like you, which essentially is what you're looking for from a teacher. You need to think fundamentally, do they have the values? Do they have the drive? Do they have, in Still I Rise context, we say ambition, bravery, and care. But whatever the identity of your education structure, whatever the identity of your school, you then need to find people who fit that. On top of then, they know in mathematics the required things. On top of that, they then need to be able to not just understand things that they're most complex from a technical point of view, but then be able to disperse that information to a variety of levels and ages and make it clear and engaging and empathize and understand what it is to be a child, understand what it is to be a teenager. They need to understand pedagogy. They need to be able to discipline manage. They need to have extraordinary patience. I could talk about this for about 3-4 hours, right? Because we have to strategize finding teachers. And I can tell you it's a damn difficult job, finding teachers. The only harder job is being the teacher. So there is no such thing as a humble, certainly there's no such thing as a humble good teacher. And if you've been there for 14 years making a difference, Valentina, there is nothing humble about it. You are doing one of the most extraordinary jobs that can possibly exist. And as I say, from the very first question, it's the solution to most of life's problems and difficulties. The solution is education, and teachers are the front line of providing that. Let's now come to the wonderful Still I Rise. I'm not sure how much you guys who are joining us online and in the room know about Still I Rise. I think some of you are a little bit aware. We're a charity, an NGO, which was formed by a few people, chiefly amongst them our CEO, Niccolo Gavoni, who is publicly known, especially on social media. I'm sure some of you follow him online. If you don't, then check him out, as well as our social media of Still I Rise itself. And it was formed in 2018. Since then, we have operated in a variety of countries, formal and informal education. It can get I'm not going to bore you all by talking about every specific nuance of what we do across each site, because it can get a little bit complex. It's very context driven. So we provide for the need that is there, and we work in very diverse places. So we have worked and completed our mission in Greece, which was our first site on an island called Samos. This was during the height of the very famous, what is often termed migration crisis, when large numbers of people were crossing across the Mediterranean. We then, after building a bit of a name for ourselves through the work there and the advocacy work, as well as education, because the organization also advocates and seeks to influence as well as just provide schooling. We then expanded across to Syria, where we still continue to run a school, and I work with some fabulous people in northwest Syria, in the rebel-held region. And we work there with children who come from a variety of backgrounds, many of them from refugee camps and displacement camps, some of them living outside of those spaces and in simple housing. Some of them are orphans, some of them have families. Again, we can get into complexities here, but we have 80 children there who we provide a year of schooling which some of them have been out of school, some of them have been in school, but they are falling behind. And we managed to get pretty good results with learning outcomes. So local schools trust that we can provide a sort of accelerated learning course for them. And then almost all of our children, over 96% each year, then continue from Syria into the public school system, whether or not they were part of it before. We operate in DRC. And in DRC, we operate with children who work in cobalt mines. So if you have a mobile phone, which I'm guessing all of you do, you have cobalt inside it. It is one of the rare earth elements. It's very important, very valuable, and the DRC is the place where most of cobalt comes from. And unfortunately, most of the people who are getting those things are children. They are cheap and don't complain and get the work done that you need to be done. And they unfortunately are exploited for these reasons. What we do is go have very brave members of staff who will go into the mines and will get children out there and into education for 3 years with us. There is something called the PNRS, which is essentially an accelerated learning course, which at the end provides primary certification so that they can continue into secondary education and make of life what they wish. So again, these are what's known as academies, Syria and DRC. These academies are not really, really long term. They're 1 to 3 years long. And the end goal is to get into the public education system and be ready for it and feel safe and secure and have sort of almost recalibrated. We also run a school now. We're starting in Yemen, which we'll do similarly, and it's just starting out now. But again, it's working with internally displaced people, people living with host communities, refugees from Somalia and Ethiopia, etc. And we run international schools as well. So we have a long-term and particularly ambitious project in Nairobi, where we offer basically the world's first international school exclusively for children from slums and refugee camps and refugees living outside of camps as well. And we have, I think, 9 nationalities in our Nairobi school. We're in our 3rd year of operation. And we are even managing to offer the IB framework to children. We are seeking authorization within the IB, and we hope within the next few months we'll have that authorization, we hope, to operate officially as an IB global school and essentially be the first of its kind globally, which is essentially we are exclusively for children of that background. And it's very exciting. It's an extremely ambitious project. The focus there, to go right back to your question, we talk about access to education. Some of the children who start with us are already attending education. You could say that they already have access. Okay, the percentages vary between 0% in DRC to closer to around 75% in Syria and in Nairobi. So you could say, well, they had access before, many of these children, and now they still have access. Are we changing access per se? Sometimes, in some cases, yes, sometimes no. But the key word is quality. And I think that's where I've always, I think in the introduction was mentioned, I've always been attracted to that in a career, is providing access to education is largely an operational technique. And those of you who know the Sustainable Development Goals will know that the Millennium Development Goals, which ended in 2015, was largely focused on just getting children into school. Well, great, that's a good start, and we know that the benefits that come from just going to a school. But for anyone who's ever seen some of these schools will know that they're no safer and no better than being at home in an environment where there may well be abuse going on. I mean, some of the environments which we refer to as school, unfortunately, in some of these countries, are horrendous, and are not worth the paper they're written on. So once we are now talking about quality, which the Sustainable Development Goals do, and which we certainly as an organisation focus on, that's the key word. How can we provide genuinely brilliant quality education? Now, then you have to define, well, what is quality education? and I could talk about that for hours, and I'm not going to. But we have 4 pillars, which I can refer to, and if you go onto our website, you'll see plastered across some of the pages. The first one is that school should be a home to children. It should be like a welcoming home. For many of the children that we serve, they don't have a safe home. They've never known what home is. To most of you who will think of home as, home being, almost equating to heart and love and people that you matter to you and people who will keep you safe. Some of you may not have had that situation and been lucky enough for that, but some of you will and will understand that what a home should be. And we believe that school should be that. And we can obviously break that down into all sorts of practical elements, and we do. Then we believe that, well, okay, who's in the home? Children. Children are in the home. They are therefore the center of what we do. So student-centered is our next pillar. So school is home, student-centered. They are the protagonists of their education. We exist as an organization because of them. And a good school will always make every decision thinking first of what's going to benefit the students the most. And that sounds nice and great, and you might be thinking, well, of course. But again, any of you who have worked at or attended a university, a school, will know a little bit about the background workings, will know just how many decisions every day are actually for the benefit of the consultant who's coming to visit and can earn some good money from plying their trade on a Thursday afternoon, or use of land space being sold off, etc., for private gain. The children slowly being left behind, right? The third one, with the student to the center, what are we there for? We are there to mentor them. And I think Valentina has touched on many of the elements that we look for in a teacher. A teacher should not just teach. In fact, actually, teaching is quite a misleading term because it implies that you are the active one. A good class, and this is true, by the way, when you're sitting in your university classes as well, a good class, you as the learner should be sweating. You should be the one doing the work. You should be the one thinking very actively, and your brain cells should be moving around. How the teacher creates that is flexible, right? But the point is that you are the protagonist and you are the center. And that's what we try and encourage, rather than self-indulgent, very long monologues, which a bit like this. We try and encourage teachers to be quiet, be on the side of the classroom, and then get the children to start taking the center stage, to start working on projects, to start creating, to start collaborating with each other, to start finding answers to their own questions, rather than just spoon feeding everything to them, telling them this is right, this is wrong, make sure you're there at this time, sit this exam, etc. Now that's the overall ethos. Of course, we still do assessment, and assessment can include examinations and essays and all sorts of things. But the point is, it should be the student at the heart of that. And finally, we talk about global thinking. Quality education, access to quality education, we believe should include a respect and an understanding of yourself, your community, and your identity, and a curiosity about the communities and identities of others. And we look at the wars happening and the pain going on in the news, and you think, imagine if we had generations of people in every country who had a respect and understanding and a pride in the differences between cultures and the differences between people and the differences that exist between types of people, but also a curiosity and a tolerance and an excitement for learning about those of others, and how many of those aforementioned problems might be resolved or indeed mitigated. So that's a little bit about what Still I Rise does, and that's a little bit about what drives us. If we go away from any message from today, it's that access to school is reaching 100%, and it will reach 99% eventually. You'll see it in the news one day, okay? The percentage is rising up. It was 90, then it was 91%. It's something like between 92 and 93% of children go to a school, have access to a school. Great. Then we talk about what is actual quality. that's the big fight, which is only just beginning. And we talk about in Italy how you've had access to school for generations, but do you have access to quality schooling? Do public school children have access to quality schooling? Perhaps not.
Okay, thank you so much. So I have another question for you, Mike. So your organization has emphasized the value of independence multiple times. And when we talk about independence, we mean being able to work independently from governments and the institutions. So my question is, could you share with us some insights on how your organization has effectively managed to work independently, and while of course advocating for the rights of vulnerable populations, and also connected to these, what are the main challenges that your organization has faced, and what the strategies that you have implemented to overcome them?
Oops, sorry. Independence is something we have gained because we've confidently explained and expressed what we do, and people have bought into that vision, and they donate money. To be frank, that is one of the biggest causes of independence. So I would say one of the factors behind how we are able to maintain the element of independence is that we do not have to rely on large donations by international organizations, which will then say, well, you must be doing this with the money, you must be doing with that. And eventually you have conflicts of interest. Okay. And eventually you start to move away from your original mission, which happens over and over again with many NGOs, not all of them, but many. We've chosen to go down the path of slower growth at times, but for the sake of maintaining independence. So could we get a $2 million grant? Yes, maybe we could. Would that enable us to move quicker in certain circumstances? Yes. But at what cost long term? So we have made the conscious decision to remain independent and true to the values that we started with. So we talk about independence, transparency, efficiency. We talk in our schools about ambition, bravery, care. Those things would generally be eroded if it wasn't for not maintaining that first one, independence. So by doing so, we have, one way we do it is by saying no sometimes. So I suppose if there's a takeaway there, you guys working for various organizations, how do you maintain an element of independence or indeed dignity sometimes? It's learning to say no at times to things that might short term seem attractive. Two, act with confidence and people will get behind you. There's 8 billion people on this planet. There's enough people that if you have a clear direction, if you know how to communicate, increasingly, if you understand how social media can function and you can use it to your benefit, you will find people who will want to support you. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, Nicolo is a key presence as an individual, but as an organization as well, we're growing in terms of our capacity to fundraise. So from a pragmatic perspective, number two is learn how to do those things so that you can become financially independent, because of course finances underpin so many things of what we do. And number three, believe in it. Believe in why you need to be independent. Keep reminding yourself of it. Put it as part of your identity. I think it was a clever thing that they put, that Still I Rise chose to have independence as one of its hallmarks. Not many organizations do that. They'd like it, but they don't tell themselves it. They don't remind themselves of it. They don't remind everyone that they recruit and comes into the organization about it. And slowly they drift away from it and they start to sell off elements of the organization quietly, 5% here, 10% there, a little thing here, a little thing there, and suddenly they're no longer this independent, driven organization with a very clear identity and very clear direction. And it becomes a bit of a mess. It happens over and over again, and it's not just NGOs that do it. So that's why we do independence, and that's how we do it. there was, by the way, I realized I didn't answer the second part of your question from the previous bit. Very briefly, to come back to that, you asked me not just about access to quality education, but about some of the times when we've had to fight for that and make it attractive within communities. The truth is that I'm not the front line of that, so I can't give you a personal testimony, but I can speak on behalf of some of my colleagues who are very bravely going into mines in DRC and are communicating with those who employ children to work in the cobalt mines and are benefiting from their very cheap labor. We present the value of education, the long-term value for society at large, the community. We give cases where good things that have happened in that community when someone from the community got education. We show passion for it, because it's not just showing a slideshow. It's about showing genuine passion and enthusiasm for that child and who they are and what they could become. We also pragmatically do provide to support holistic support for children and families, so there's no doubt that can help things move along as well. So we provide food packages for families of students at our schools, because that can help with their education. Obviously, a hungry child doesn't learn very well, so we do it for that reason. But there's no doubt that obviously that can also sometimes be an influence and help just get over the line when you're trying to encourage a parent who is deciding, do I want my child to go into the marketplace and start work, or do I want my child to continue their education? And that can be sometimes the thing that helps them make that decision. And we get to know the families on an individual basis. We have times during the week and during the month when they can come and visit us and talk about these things and talk about their concerns. We put in place various, we try and make it difficult to pull your child out of school once you're attending, because if it was convenient and simple, then you'd have more people making rash decisions and children losing out on education as a result. So you set up an infrastructure where it requires multiple stages where you think, yes, I'm absolutely sure I want to do this. And as a result, once a child starts with us, we have very few dropouts. I think we've had 3 dropouts in 2023 out of hundreds and hundreds of children, and many reasons that they might drop out. Sorry, I just sneaked in the second part of my answer to the previous question there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I would like to ask more in a regional way. So while having a global reach, Stellarize retain also a strong presence in Italy, where it promotes projects aimed at supporting the quality of education offered. And among this project, there is Insieme. And could you provide insight into the key elements and components of Insieme? And can you share some specific instance where Insieme is facilitating cultural diversity, for example, and understanding in the Italian school context and build student sensitivity? Or what are the key aspects of this project through which the organization proposed to achieve these goals?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give the boring introduction, and then Valentina's going to give you the much better and more interesting answer about particular cases. So just to give everyone a very quick introduction to what Insieme is. Obviously, you don't need a British guy to tell you what Insieme means, but the idea being that together we can achieve great things. And it is an online workshop, well, certainly delivered online, for schools, for teachers and children, and for students. It is largely aimed at children roughly between the ages of absolute minimum of 8 years old, but ideally a little above, going all the way up to sort of 16 years old. The majority of our students tend to be in lower secondary who take part in it, and that's probably the age where you maybe get the most out of it, is lower secondary and starting to go into upper secondary. What do? Well, we have stages. So the first module is for teachers, and that explains a little bit about our model. And it tells you some of the things I've said and gives some practical examples of what we do in the classroom, etc., in our sites for the benefit of teachers and specifically for the audience of those working in education. Then that leads into a module which is then for children, for those participating in school, where they learn about Still I Rise and its history. So it's child-friendly material, which the teacher can use as they wish. It's very, very flexible. It can be done as a presentation, activities around it, so it can be very student-centered in approach. And from there, they then have a project, and they have a choice of 3 projects. It might be about reading, and we have one about reading Nicolo's books, or indeed one of the books, and studying them and doing activities about that. We have one which is a fun photography project where you take photos it's called Through Our Eyes. So it's a project that we've done with children on Samos Island in Greece, and we've done in other schools as well, where our students take photos of their local communities and then share them with each other. And so you can engage in that, and that's popular as well. And then we also have one on citizenship and learning about how to be a good citizen. This year, we're going to tell the story about how we managed to close down a dump site next to our school in Nairobi and stopped poisonous fumes coming over and poisoning the kids at our school. And we managed through advocacy efforts to get that shut down, and we're turning it into a greener space. So we tell that story and then give hopefully a bit of inspiration that if we can do that with our kids, then definitely there's no reason why we can't do similar things in Italian schools as well. It is content all in Italian, by the way. So yeah, it's proved incredibly popular. It was something like 8,000 children took part in it last year. We're looking for even more schools to take part this year. So if any of you are sitting there and thinking, I know a teacher, or I'm going to be a teacher, or I know a school, and I think they would absolutely love this or learn from this, maybe they should love it, although maybe they're not already Still I Rise fans officially, please do go to the website and you can find information about it. But a very easy and accessible thing to do is to email. I'm going to give you an email now, so write it down. schools@stillirisengo.org. That's schools@stillirisengo, as in non-governmental organization in English, .org, O-R-G. I'm happy to put that into a link somewhere, but do give us an email, and my some people in my department will get back to you and would love to send information about how we can spread the good work of Insieme. I hand over to Valentina to now explain what it's like from a teaching perspective and some of the benefits it can bring.
I have personally taken part in this project with my colleagues and my students last year. And as far as the material in Italian are concerned, maybe we asked to have them in English too, because I had to translate all of them and like recreate, slide by slide, which was fun.
This year we're going to make an English version as well.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my Canva skills improved, but okay. So no, really, as Mike said, it was like an interactive journey, really, and with these 3 different projects, and our students participated in all these projects in different classes. And it was great because at the end of this journey, we had the chance to meet with Nicolo during an online meeting, which was really great for the kids. They were really struck by what Nicolo said, and by the moment he took them to visit their international school in Kenya, with a phone. So they saw the school outside. It was very nice. It was actually great, and I think, like, kids, for example, kids in one of our 3rd years read Se fosse tuo figlio, one of Nicola Gavoni's books, and were deeply struck by those kids' stories and how Still I Rise was born in response to the basic needs of those refugee children in Samos, Greece. So also the pictures taken by these migrant kids in refugee camps, and those are actually the pictures, the photos that you will see in our Through Our Eyes exhibition that is actually outside down the hall. You're all invited to visit it, absolutely. These pictures really moved the students and made them reflect on their lives too. And my kids in two other classes in the third year were also very engaged and interested in what they saw and heard, especially one kid whose father got here in Italy from Albania as a clandestine on one of the big boats we've seen in the news in the early 1990s. And this kid truly appreciated the fact that we talked about migrants' journey, and he felt really seen in his family history.
So thank you so much. And so the next question is actually addressed to both of you. So, and it is also connected to what you previously said. So could you share with us some relevant results that you have been able to observe, and what are in the positive effects? And we're not only talking about on students, but also on the environment and the community where these students live.
Yes, absolutely. What I could see is that all of the students were interested and involved in the project. They were all very curious about Still Rise mission, and some of them were particularly struck by the fact that these kids could receive such a high level of education for free. I'm talking about the international schools. Know that for Still Rise kids are free. Whereas, for example, they or their friends should have to pay to attend an international school, of course. So from that observation, like an interesting discussion started, and everyone expressed their opinion and point of view. Some of them even wrote essays during the Italian written tests to talk about this and reflected on this for a long time. Also, my colleagues were really the first to be impressed by Nicola Gavoni's experience, and they loved his books and started following also Still Rise activities. And for example, at the end of the photography project with second years, some students came up with the idea of creating a spoken commentary on the photos, which could be accessed through a QR code under every picture. So if you access this QR code, you can listen to actually their young voices commenting everything. It's very nice. So I think this activity also stimulated their creativity and definitely improved their technological skills too.
So thank you. I don't know if Mike would you like to add something.
Nope, all good. Thank you.
So we pass to the next question.
Yeah, that is for both of them. Going back how to a more specific level, focusing again on the same students and how to empower them through education. SDG number 4 tries to draw a definition of what is a quality education and what it consists of. But from your perspective, what constitutes a quality education nowadays, and what are the key knowledge and skill that a student needs to acquire in 2023? And do you think that a universal model of education can exist, or the education system, the teaching system should be personalized according to the country, to the context, or according also to the students?
Should I start? Because I'd really prefer for Mike to finish. So personally, from my point of view, as I said, a quality education is an education that deals with all the aspects of every individual, every student we have in front of us. We have to take into account their family history, their cultural background, but most importantly, psychological, relational, and human aspects. Students are not defined by what they know, understand, or cannot or can do. They are, first of all, a whole universe inside of a little body, a universe that's ready to explode and blossom and flourish. They are souls, and they need a loving and kind look on them. We have to help them explore their full potential, not just as learners, but as human beings. They have to know they're more than what social media, society, and sometimes even their parents make them believe they are. Together with that, of course, we have to provide high quality content and transmit valuable knowledge with all the means and resources we have. Even though I can tell you from experience that sometimes the most technological or advanced educational tools are not the most effective on students. So, as I said, I'm going to repeat myself, but in my personal opinion, empathy and emotional intelligence are the skills we should focus on more to help these kids approach their classmates, their friends, neighbors, and strangers in the best possible way. As we know, kids learn mostly by example. And so, as adults, we are responsible to be the first ones to live up to these principles and ideals. We cannot tell them how important some values are and then not live by them in the first place. So, in my opinion, what Still Arise is proposing is a universal model in some way, because it's not so specific, like on how it should be implemented or the ways in which it should be run, but it really focuses on, once again, teacher-student relationships, how students should be the center of the learning process, and how students should be helped to have a global and open perspective on reality.
And for Mr. Mike,
You nearly called me Mr. Fisher then again. No, thank you. I mean, that was a beautiful answer. The second part of that question is really interesting. Should there be anything universal about education? Should someone in Rwanda, rural Rwanda, should any element of their education be coherent with someone living in an urban city in China? And I think that's a really, really interesting conversation to have. I'm not a fan of prescribing what everyone should do. I think education is incredibly powerful. You have usually young lives in your hands, and you should take that responsibility incredibly carefully. It's a privilege and an honor to work in education, and to design education, to design curricula, to be a teacher working with children in curricular or extracurricular activities. I therefore, whenever it comes to something like power, I personally, from a political perspective, I don't think power should lie in any individual or single organization's hands. Therefore, a world in which every school was an IB school, or every school was a Still I Rise school, or every school was a Montessori school, or whatever it is, I think probably is not something we should be aiming for. A singular mono, not monotheistic, but you know what I mean. Heterogeneous, I believe is the word. Education system is not something to aim for. Variety and diversity in every sense is a beautiful thing. And diversity of thought and diversity of ideas and diversity of politic and diversity of pedagogy and diversity of content and diversity of focus is something to encourage in each country, let alone on a global scale. So the imposition of a certain framework across the whole planet, whatever it is, or the imposition of a singular value or whatever it is not something to necessarily aim for. But given that no one has ever achieved that and likely never will, I don't think us trying to go global as an organization is going to threaten this, right? We are never obviously going to be in a world where every single school is a Still I Rise school. However, what we can do is offer a framework which, in theory, could work if you were keen on the idea in your school, no matter where you're from. So it's not imposed upon you, but out of choice, you could opt into it. And so that is what we are slowly and steadily working towards. And we are fine-tuning based on experience what that model is. And we're not going to be arrogant enough to say that it's ready. There we go. We got the answer. Everyone follow us. We are learning. We are researching. This year, we've been doing some data gathering, and we've been facing up to areas that we need to improve, of which there are still many. We do not have all the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers. And anyone who tells you they do, again, is a liar. So to go back to that, no, I don't think we should aim for a universal form of education. I think we should aim for a diversity on a global level. But I think the framework that we are setting out with these pillars that I referred to earlier, and I can repeat them, although I'd love to know whether anyone remembers them. But student-centered, school is home, teacher is mentor, and global thinking. We do believe that that framework can work in any situation. If it can work in a very unusual setting in DRC, if it can work on an island in Greece, if it can work in Colombia, where we're going to be starting soon, if it can work with boys, girls, refugees, people from the country that we're operating in, if it can work with children as young as 8, if it can work with teenagers as old as 17, if it can work with children who have disabilities, then we believe increasingly we're proving that this is something that can be something that people can get behind and get excited by. But there's still a long way to go. There's still a long way to go to continue proving ourselves and expanding. And ultimately, people will follow us the more we can prove. So, and that's my job, is to lead a department which not only internally reviews, but continually seeks to create and expand and improve weekly, monthly, annually, until we are a force which people want to get behind, not just because it sounds nice, but because we have cold hard evidence that this stuff brings results that mean something to the people who actually benefit from them, which is the children who become young adults, who develop their careers based on what they want to do, and who change the communities that they're in. One element that I want to point out of our model, to be specific, and it comes under the umbrella of student-centered, is that we seek the children, we encourage the children to look at how what they're learning is going to be A, of use to them, and B, of use to others. So this to me is something I would encourage in any school in the world. You do not want to sit there as a student, whether you are in a university or a school, and go, why am I learning this? Why am I here? Why are you telling me about trigonometry? I don't get what's the purpose of this. And we've all had that experience, right? So in the template for our lesson plans at Still I Rise, their teacher must say not only what content are we going to cover, but why is the content and the method of delivering that content and the projects that they're doing using that content, how is this benefiting the students now? How will it benefit themselves in the future? And then a final one, which they have to write into their lesson plans, how will they use this to help others? Because we want caring children who get into the habit of thinking, how's this good for me? How's this good for others? And like every habit, you need to build it through repetition. And so there's just a little practical example of how we build and systematize an element of the model.
Okay, so thank you so much for having shared with us your experience and expertise. So I think that this concludes the first part. And then there is the second part reserved for the Q&A. So if you have questions, please. Okay, great.
Yeah, if
Come there.
Yeah.
Or-
I think so. It works.
sure.
Okay. Thank you for, I put myself here. Okay, thank you for your wonderful presentations. I have one question for Mike and one observation, and maybe I want your comment on the Italian system and European system. But first, my question. I understood from what you said throughout your answers that there's a tension, let's say, between ensuring a quality education, so not perpetrating the inequality existing in that society, but at the same time not imposing a model. So I guess that's an existing tension, and I want to ask you if if there is some kind of opposition from within the society you operate in regarding this tension. For example, if one of the students have especially conservative parents, and they may be saying, oh, look, these white people coming teaching to our children how they should behave, how they should be, and so on. Or not just from the population, but also from the government, because I guess you gotta put in touch with those governments, I assume. So maybe if there's some opposition both at the population level and on the political level. And then, do I go with my observation right now, or?
Yeah, as you prefer.
Like we underlined all the good things education does against inequalities in a society, but as I said, both in the global south and in the global north, education can perpetrate inequalities. For example, in my opinion, the distinction between prestigious universities, when we talk about higher level of education, and non-prestigious universities, is basically inequality perpetrated, because if you go seeing who attends the prestigious universities are most likely children of people who attended prestigious universities. So that's not only a question we should pose ourselves when looking at other parts of the world, but we should also like change something in our system with respect to education and inequality.
Thank you. What was your name?
Mariano.
Mariano. Thank you, Mariano. Wonderful as questions and observation. Mariano, I certainly agree. I very, very passionately believe that education not only can mitigate and solve things, but if done unthinkingly, is the number one way you will perpetrate existing inequalities. I mean, it's the best way of doing it. If you were going to intentionally try and exacerbate inequalities, the first thing you would do is look to the education system. And education can be incredibly divisive. It is ultimately a political act to educate a child. You are essentially saying, I mean, education at its heart is saying, I'm not going to let you go and do whatever you like and be whatever you want to do without any form of intervention. I mean, that is why we educate, right? Otherwise, why would we have schools? Why would we do anything? We just let human beings grow up and do what they want to do. And you wouldn't have any sorts of institutions or idea that we're going to, I mean, ultimately, although it is supposed to be an act of allowing people to emancipate themselves and done out of genuine care, it is a form of imposition. It is a form of intervention. It is, to a certain extent, an act of arrogance in saying that I believe you can be better than you would be without my support. And that is then tripled and tenfold an issue to think about if you're going to go into another country and start doing that, and even more so when it's a developing vulnerable context. So I can assure you it's something that's definitely on our mind a lot. And you have to be very, very careful. To give an example, you asked whether the communities sometimes fight back or say, hey, what's going on? Yeah, it can happen. We don't get it too much because we're quite careful from the beginning to explain and get the buy-in of what we call the caregivers, because not everyone has families, so we call them caregivers. They might be orphanage owners, or they might be parents, or anyone. But we try and get the caregivers buy-in. We try and let them have a voice within the school from the beginning. And when you do that, you don't tend to have such angry or frustrated responses because people feel an element of ownership. So that's method one. Include people in the room, and then you'll have less direct opposition. Most frustration and anger comes when people have for too long been left out in the cold. That's just true of anything. Secondly, you mentioned white people coming over. It's worth pointing out that our staff are pretty much entirely local people from the country that we're operating in. So in Nairobi, there's one Congolese teacher, and the rest of them are in Nairobi. The school leaders are Kenyan. The school leaders are Kenyan. And in Syria, they're all Syrian. So that can help as well. Now that's support, that obviously is also, that's important for so many reasons: local knowledge, local understanding. But that would only be aesthetic if you didn't then give them a voice. So it's really important to not just be aesthetic. So, oh look, we've got local people teaching the kids. Doesn't that look good? So for instance, people often ask me, what's the curriculum and how do you decide what the curriculum is? I can say that I have probably had personal input, on maybe less than 1% of the curriculum content. The content itself is decided by the teachers. It is decided by the local ministries if we are working alongside them. If we are working entirely independently, which for instance we are in Nairobi, every teacher in their own department has decided what the curriculum strands they're going to address in each year of schooling is going to be. I didn't decide that. I gave them some guidelines and some suggestions. I told them where they can find strands from around the world. I told them to make sure that we build in passion and pride for local artists, local politics, local history, and to have an emphasis on those things within the East African context. But otherwise, they can also then choose to take elements from the Australian curricula, or the American curricula, or the Nigerian curricula, or the French curricula. You know, there's no barriers to that. So I can honestly say that almost the entire curriculum is decided by the staff. What I guess we impose more is the framework and the pedagogy, the style of education. But that doesn't tend to be what people get frustrated by. Most people, most parents, we find, will be more frustrated not by how you teach the children, but what you teach the children. I mean, I'm sure many of you are aware of the various arguments going on in the US, in the educational world, about Florida, etc. Should we be teaching children about this? Should we be teaching children about that? Is it right that they cover these areas? Racial bias, trans rights, etc. Should those be something that children are taught about? And how do we teach them? What do we teach them about it? It's content, right? It's what do we teach? That tends to be the emphasis. And when the Nazis burnt books, they were worried about the content, about what to teach. Nazis didn't burn the pedagogy. And people don't tend to get upset or angry or frustrated about how you teach. And that really, how you teach, is the imposition that's there. And I can say that, yes, we push that on the school and we push that on the teachers. We push our model. But of course we do, because we have to have a brand, we have to have consistency, and there has to be a functional organization. But I can sleep at night knowing that as a Westerner, as a Brit, especially in somewhere like Kenya, right, former colonial country of Britain, I am not sitting there telling Kenyans and people from East Africa what they can and can't learn. I'm pushing more how learning can happen well. And that comes from research, background, and the input of East Africans themselves. So even the pedagogy itself, there's input there. So hopefully there's a nuanced point between the differences of how we learn and what we learn. There is very little imposition in Still I Rise on what to learn. It is much more on how to learn, which, by the way, is also something true of the IB. If any of you know anything about the IB, the International Baccalaureate, people go, oh, well, the IB curriculum. The IB doesn't really have a curriculum. The IB doesn't really tell you what you can and can't learn. The IB focuses on how you learn and gives you a framework for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. We have also another question for you, Mike. You mentioned earlier that in university, the students are those who should struggle, who should do the hard work. And from the perspective of an Italian university, for example, students sometimes in our model of education seems to be more passive when compared to other nation systems. And what should, in your opinion, students do in the first place to be more proactive and to try to change this model?
You should be creating. You should question, am I making things? Am I doing the things which I would be expecting to do in the jobs that these courses are supposedly preparing me for? Or if it's not, if you're doing a degree which is not so much like, let's say, law, going quite clearly into a legal career, or medicine or something like that, if you're doing a degree or a course which is more broad, let's say something like, to take a typical example, something like philosophy, where it's not necessarily specific a way what you might be doing employment-wise next, you still think about, well, what elements of my life would I be using this? When would it be helpful? When would it be instructive and exciting and making a difference that I have learned these things? Practice them now. University is basically one massive practice session for outside of university, in my opinion. I mean, it's many other things, of course. Universities are noble institutions which offer more than just that, but for the students, fundamentally, I would argue that a university, and indeed that's the same logic we use. Why just universities, right? It should be schools, it should be primary schools, it should be everything. Is basically a massive place to give things a go and make loads of mistakes. And not to have to worry that hundreds of people are going to be, horribly affected by the outcome, because often there'll be an element of safety or artificiality to what you're doing. It may be a theoretical thing that you're doing rather than that is the time, right? So I would say you should be expecting as a university student to be living life fully, to be living out your dream career as much as possible, to be doing exciting projects, to be collaborating, to be making stuff, to be impacting people, and to be doing this stuff, and to be learning all of the mistakes you can possibly make and get them out of the way as quickly as possible. That to me is a pragmatic, exciting, and dynamic university experience. Now, if you're not having, I don't want to start a riot at your at the university, of course. If you're looking around going, wait a minute, we don't do this. Change doesn't happen overnight with this stuff. But I do believe that we all should be doing something to push more of that happening in education. I'm doing that in my career with mainly secondary education, but I don't work so much in further education in universities. But I believe, I mean, more than any other type of education, there's no excuses, right? You could argue with a primary school, well, okay, but they've not yet got the language to do hugely exciting, high order of thinking, things like creating big projects and presentations, etc. So that we have to go a bit slower. Okay, fine. But once you get to secondary school and then university, it should just be one massive practice session of stuff which interests people, and is going to be useful. Sitting in a lecture hall, listening to people over and over again, especially in the days where technology exists and videos exist, and you could be doing blended learning and flipped learning and everything else. The excuses are running out amongst further institution providers, I believe, for how they can revolutionize this. It's been a long time coming, and I mean, you've opened up a lot of opinions here. I believe fundamentally we need to change how we rank universities. Okay, so we're not going to do away with rankings. People often say, "Oh, we need to get rid of ranking systems." It won't work. People want rankings. Parents in a new area want to know what the best schools are like. People who are 18, 19 or whatever, or doing further study when they're older, etc., will want to know which universities would be good to go to. How do I decide which one I want to go to? And ranking systems are a great way of doing it. It's a form of assessment. Don't try and change that and do away with that. Instead, we need to evolve how ranking systems happen. And fundamentally, at the moment, most ranking systems of universities are fundamentally assigned points by how much your lecturers have managed to get their research papers into publications. Which, when you're a student studying engineering or law, probably doesn't matter that much to you, right? Good for them, but is that actually having an impact on how much you're learning and how dynamic your course is and how many mistakes you're being able to make in your course? Ranking systems are evolving, they are improving, they are starting to take into account student satisfaction, etc. I'm aware these things are happening, but I believe that when you speak to most university students and people who understand how the ranking algorithms work, it needs to be updated. I can give you a practical example. I don't want to disrespect my own background, but I went to the Institute of Education in UCL. It was a wonderful course and with wonderful people, and I'm not going to knock it. But that course has been #1 in the world for a long time now. And really, there's a lot that could still be improved. And I know a thing or two about some of the other courses that are supposedly lower down in the rankings and how practically useful they've been to the people who attended them. But it's lower down in the rankings because the lecturers didn't get their theoretical publications published in journals which were spread to so many people. It's also a massive Britain and America massively benefit from the enormous, overwhelming privilege of being a native English organization. Again, I've benefited from this. I continue to benefit. I'm benefiting it from right now talking English to all of you, 99% of you who will be non-native speakers in English. I continue to benefit from the system, but I'm aware it exists and it needs to change. There is an overwhelming lack of diversity amongst how we run our educational institutions in further education and in secondary education, but especially further education. And much of it comes from an incredibly Anglo-centric way of doing things. And we continue to have priority because we are native English speakers and our publications, we just have all the privileges and advantages when it comes to getting our publications spread out. So all of these things are interconnected. I mean, if you want to get into a massive conspiracy theory, it's real. I mean, it exists, and it's not a surprise or being hidden. But something needs to be done about that because there is not enough acknowledgement of other ways of doing education, which is in fact happening. Latin American courses should be way higher up on the ranking list. People should be flooding over to Latin American courses on education. I can tell you now, they are absolute hotbeds of innovation and excitement and quality of learning. They tend to take a bit longer than, let's say, a British course, etc. But they are incredibly student-centered. They are very pragmatic. You have lots of one-on-one time with tutors, and you end up learning a lot more. And they are something like number 50, number 70 on the list because Latin American tutors aren't getting their publications spread around. And of course, good universities top of the rankings continue to attract enough people that they can be selective, and then they can continue to do well with results, etc. And they can keep generating year after year and continue to expand on their advantage, just like private schools do. It is a self-fulfilling system which needs massive interruption. So if any of you can help interrupt that system, go for it. I've got a couple of thoughts on the matter. I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Mike.
So thank you for your insightful answer. And there is one more question, and it is addressed to you, Professor. So it's quite similar to this one, but they also want to know your opinion about that. So in the case of younger students, they ask, and less proactive, but what are the strategies, or how can students be encouraged to be more proactive?
Okay, so what can I say? Well, I think we really have to stimulate them, and we really have to start from their passions, their talents, their interests. Because yeah, now, as Mike said, long monologues in a class are not, possible anymore. Like maybe once they were. So you definitely have to start. You have to believe in them first of all, which is something we tend not to do. Especially with young kids. As I said, I work with pre-teenagers, let's say, so from 11 to 13, 14 years old. And we tend to see them as very young, very green, very, naive or whatever. Like they don't know a lot of things. We are adults, they don't know. But they know. They know a lot of things and they feel a lot of things. And you can actually work with them and they will surprise you every time you give them the chance to. You gotta give them responsibilities. You gotta make them feel big in a way, like you can do this, like you're up to the job. It's not because you're 11 or 12 or 13 that you cannot do these things. As I said, they have organized a full entire scientific convention by themselves this year and last year, and they were able to speak in front of uh, a lot of people, like around 300 people. There were their families, their friends, but also authorities from the city, and they were amazing at it. I was surprised in the first place. As colleagues, we were all surprised in the first place by what they could do. And where did this come from? I guess, as I said, from making them feel responsible, making them feel appreciated, making them believe in themselves, and showing them that they are up for the job, they can do it. And as I said, you really have to make them work, as Mike said, especially like it's not the teacher telling them what to do when you should be doing this, like this or that. You you should guide them, of course, you're there to guide them, but at the same time, you should let their creativity express, and also the younger people in the room, and they know things that, for example, I'm not that old, but of course, I don't know what they know now. And sometimes they tell me, oh, teach, I've learned this and that about any, I don't know, app or program or whatever they're using. And it's enriching, I learn from them every day, and I know that they're giving me way more than what I'm giving them.
Thank you so much. Are there other questions from the audience? No.
Can I briefly add on to that proactivity point?
Of course.
Apologies. So in a bid for this to be relevant to your lives, I'm aware that not all of you are education students. Many of you will be listening to this out of interest, but have a background and a future in other areas and other careers. But education is going to be something that touches upon every career. Every time you are seeking someone to change or to learn, that is education. It doesn't have to be called a school for it to be education. So if you're going to work in a legal area and you have a new intern come in and you need to train them up, you are going to educate them, etc. So this stuff, the things that we're talking about here, are relevant, I hope, to everyone, no matter what your background or future. We all are educators, and all will be in moments where we have to educate and be educated. So being learner-centered is, I think, just a crucial life skill, and designing learner-centered opportunities is a crucial life skill. So to give you an example and to get a little bit meta, right now, this is one way of doing things, but an alternative. So let's say you guys invite us back next year to the next wonderful conference. What I would encourage is perhaps a different way of handling this, because this right now is not how we would deliver a class at Still I Rise, because the two of us, Valentina and I, have basically dominated. We have been the font of all knowledge, and for an hour and a half have been speaking at you from on high. I mean, in my case, literally on high, on the top of a big screen. That is, if a teacher was doing this, I would be saying, no, hang on. So we have these three habits in our schools, and one of the habits that we should have is that no teacher should spend in total more than 10 minutes explaining something per lesson. So if you have an hour's class, if you add up all the time that you stand there at the front of the class explaining a concept or anything or just talking at the children, it shouldn't add up to any more than 10 minutes per class. That's a good rule of thumb for you to use in any time when you're going to educate. Try and talk less than the person you're educating. Now, right now, that's not happening. I'm monologuing at you and it's not responsive, etc. So next time what we could do is we present 3 problems that Still I Rise face and challenges that we're facing in our day-to-day work. And I would introduce what we do. I would introduce the problem. I'd introduce 1 or 2 ways that we've been trying to resolve stuff but has not worked. and we would then spend the next hour breaking into teams, coming up with solutions. And you would all go on your phones and you would research and take a look. You would also bring in elements that you've been studying. And those of you from an engineering background could give an engineer's response to the solution to the problem. And those of you from a legal background could draw upon your legal expertise, etc. And we would together come up with solutions to the problems. Okay. And I would then go away and I would steal your ideas and I would take full credit for them. Okay, so everyone benefits. But do you see what I mean? That would then mean that 80% of the time you guys were speaking, you guys were collaborating, you were researching, you were setting up longer term ways to learn more about that topic. Right. So by getting you to go on your phone and research solutions to the problem that Still I Rise faces, you will find yourself Googling Still I Rise. You will find yourself Googling education in Syria. You will find yourself learning facts and topics. That will be on your search history. You will start then knowing, okay, I've done that once. When you go home in the evening, you might then continue to research it. You're going to be far more likely to do that if we do it that way round than if I just talk at you about Syria and Still I Rise and education. And that is learner-centered learning. Every single opportunity you have to learn or to teach in whatever career or any element of life you're in, or parenting or whatever you're doing, try and think, how can the energy being spent be focused on the learner? How can you make yourself redundant? Okay, it's another rule of thumb as a teacher, as an educator, is how quickly can you make yourself unnecessary to this class? How quickly can you get to the point where you could walk out for an hour, come back in, and still would have had the same amount of learning as they would do if you were there? That should always be what you're aiming for as an educator. Unfortunately, we have an education systems don't encourage that. We attract people with egos who don't want that, but that should be what you're seeking to do. As the facilitator of learning, you should seek to make yourself redundant as possible, as quickly as possible. And they should become as independent and self-driven as possible, become true lifelong learners.
Thank you so much, Mike.
So thank you so much. If there are no questions, no. So I think we can conclude here. I remember that until tomorrow you have the possibility to visit the exhibition in the All of the Teaching app. And so, yeah, thank you to our guests for having provided your expertise, and your work and commitment are truly commendable. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I propose a round of applause.